What's up, everybody? Welcome in a post-game edition of the Sooners on SI podcast. I'm Ryan Chapman here with Carson Field on my left. Carson, how are you?
Doing great. Heck of a football game that the three of us just covered. I was obviously out on the field, and that was a great atmosphere. Had a lot of fun out there, so glad to be breaking it down.
Not too hot for you, I hope.
Not too bad.
Okay.
Second quarter got a little dicey, but I survived.
Beautiful. We got the great Ryan Aber on my right. Ryan, a 24-17 victory for the Sooners. SEC play opened. Oklahoma hype train rolling.
Yeah, I mean that's what I wrote after the game. Is that the performance of this Sooners defense? 9 sacks. They initially had them with 10 to set the program record. Took one of them away from Marvin Jones Jr., but still, and just incredibly dominant performance from especially the front seven of the defense. The back end showed a little bit of cracks, and they got some things to clean up there, but the front seven was dominant. And what I wrote after this game is that the sky is the limit for this team because of how dominant that defense can be.
It's been a wild first 4 weeks, first month here of the season for Oklahoma, and I think that is kind of perfectly encapsulated by today's game. A wild one. We had a bunch of reviews, controversial reviews. We had a touchdown that stood today that just moments before we fired up this podcast, SEC officials came down and said that should not have stood. All that, we're going to dive into it all. But let's start, Aber, with where you ended your night, or I guess before this, which was talking about that defensive line. Guys, so much of this build, so much of this lead-up was laser focused on Jackson Arnold, returning to Norman, all that fun stuff. And it was a really, really long day for Arnold. I thought he stood in there. I thought he took a billion hits. It was tough as nails. But like you mentioned, Ryan, 9 sacks for this Oklahoma defensive line. And 9 sacks for the Oklahoma defense, but it was in large part due to the defensive line. Carson, you obviously had a great view at it. But from up in the box, we looked at it. Jaden Jackson, 2.5 sacks. Unbelievable performance. David Stone, 2 sacks. Unbelievable performance. It was a spot where, Carson, it didn't really matter what Auburn tried to do running the football. Even their explosive runs were a result of, honestly, Oklahoma rallying to the football and hitting each other. And Jeremiah Cobb spun out of one. That was Auburn's biggest run of the day. An absolutely 10 out of 10 performance for this front seven, doing everything they need to do to stop the run and hit Jackson Arnold over and over and over again.
No, 100%. And I think this performance really just showed the depth more than anything else of this team. Obviously, the star power with guys like our Mason Thomas coming in, making a huge role. Jaden Jackson was incredible tonight. But, I mean, you look at so many different guys on the defense, especially the front seven, that played huge roles. David Stone, you mentioned him. I'd argue this was his best game as a Sooner tonight. Former 5-star, and through 4 games, he's really looked the part this year, which is big because he was kind of quiet as a freshman. So he's been fantastic. Great for the Sooners that he's so young, obviously. And Jaden Jackson, I mean, you could argue that he's the best player on this team. I know that might be a hot take, but he is that much of a difference maker, just that big body, just constantly hitting Jackson Arnold, making him uncomfortable. I thought the defensive line just really, really did a lot to limit a run game that we talked about as being so good going into the week with Arnold's legs, Cobb's, Alston. I mean, they have a good run game, and Oklahoma didn't really make it seem that way.
Yeah, Aber, it started on the first possession, too. It was stuff, and then Taylor Wine, because no Mason Thomas for the first half. He made his impact. He made his presence felt in the second half. But it was a situation where there was no real settling in process for the Oklahoma defense. It was dominant from the start.
Yeah, they got after it from the beginning. And Carson, to your point, I don't know that there is an argument that this is David Stone's best game. I think it was very clearly his best performance tonight. I mean, heck, you just look at that last drive with the impact that he had made. I think it was one of them might have been taken away from a penalty, but I believe he had 3 tackles just on that drive and really helped set the tone inside for them. On a drive that ended with our Mason Thomas's safety, just dominant all around for them. And I think, so much of the talk this week was who's going to fill in for our Mason Thomas with him out the second half or the first half. are they just going to be, holding on for dear life, especially with Marvin Jones Jr. on the availability report with some questions. He wound up coming off that and made a big impact as well. But just the waves that this defense can throw at you. I mean, you think about, as good as Grayson Halton was, he was another one who was fantastic on that last drive. He's not a starter on this team. When you can just roll through those guys, keep them fresh, we saw what they can do tonight, and they wore down a really good Auburn offensive line and made them look pedestrian. I think the Auburn offensive line had 8 penalties tonight. Six false starts, if I'm not mistaken, and 2 offensive holdings. And just, I think that's another layer to this that just shows how good this front 7 in particular is.
Yeah, Auburn also had a 2 delay of games in there as well, which I think just showed, on one hand, the false starts. Brent Venables came into the postgame and talked about, hey, the crowd gets a game ball, all that stuff, because of all the false starts and all that stuff. For a crowd that I thought was like a good crowd, it wasn't even like the Michigan crowd, too. That just kind of shows what I think that this crowd and this defense does to people, but also the delay of games, the holdings, like you mentioned. And it seemed like, in a weird way, guys, the only time that Auburn really had success is when they were backed up in terrible field position, and you saw that second drive coming on out. That's where the one little, I would say, penalties and the coverage decisions on Cam Coleman might be the biggest, negative marks for Oklahoma's defense today. You go to that second Auburn drive, and that's when Hugh Freeze had a ton of confidence in Jack Starlin, said, I'll let him take a shot. That one was the one where Peyton Bowen and Gentry Williams were both trailing behind. I don't think Oklahoma's defense was totally set. There were 3 instances
yeah, there was a couple where
in the first half. Yeah,
early.
And I don't know if that was Brent Venables not getting the play in soon enough, or if that was just some communication stuff on the back end. But that was a 46-yard chunk play, and then that second drive, it was also extended. I guess not technically extended, but it was made easier for Auburn by a Gentry Williams face mask kind of after the play. But they settled in. There were 2 different occasions tonight where Oklahoma gave up a 40-plus yard chunk play, and then that drive had no points result of it. And one of those big ones was, I think our buddy Eli Letterman labeled it as an Auburn masterclass in the the second quarter, where Auburn has a 40-yard completion to Cam Coleman on the sideline. That was the first time that Cam Coleman really got the better of Cortland Guillory, who had
right after Grayson Miller had just done a fantastic job
yes.
pinning Auburn deep. And you thought, hey, this is the time where they can, pin back their ears and get after him. And then Jackson Arnold makes a great play to Cam Coleman. And then false start. Suddenly you went from your own 3-yard line out to the 43. Now you're back on the 38. Then Jackson Arnold is sacked by Marvin Jones. That's the one that was pulled off for the horse collar. So moving back and forth. A delay of game later in this drive, and then a big negative play. In the end, Auburn gets nothing out of it, despite the fact that they had the 40-yard chunk play. So we talked about it, that this is gonna be the first time the secondary got some of these, got this real test, guys. I do not think that the secondary cover themselves in glory all the time, Carson. A lot of that is the fact that Brent Venables talked about after the game, that Cortland Guillory came over and jokingly said, could I get a safety coach? And he's like, nope, that's not in the plan. But I also think the flip side of that, too, is there were some big moments late in the game where the secondary was making big plays. And it was one of those things that this was not I know you weren't here for this, but we have seen a lot of, the Ryans here, a lot of one bad play, suddenly, mentally, a really strong defensive performance just goes totally in the toilet. And even the secondary, which was maybe the weakest part of today's defensive performance, found ways to bounce back and make plays when it mattered.
Yeah, I thought definitely, especially just kind of singling out Cortland Guillory. You're right. I mean, Cam Coleman did get the better of him a good several times, and that's kind of to be expected with a receiver as good as Cam Coleman. He's going to get his. Doesn't matter how good the defensive back is. Even so, not Guillory's best game, but what I liked about him is he never seemed, like you just said, he never seemed to get too down about it, played with the same swagger, celebrating when the defense did get big plays. He didn't seem to be too mentally phased, even if he was getting physically beaten by Coleman on most of the reps. it's a learning experience, and Brent Venables said that in the press conference. Like, yeah, you're gonna face some really dang good receivers in this league. You're young. You're gonna get beat sometimes, and that didn't sink the Sooners. The defense kept it swagger all game long. When they did allow chunk plays, usually a really good response. So overall, I mean, a negative point in this game, but not something that just totally sunk them.
Yeah, I think, Ryan mentioned Gentry Williams and a play that he struggled on. He comes back and makes a couple of really big plays there at the end, including on a lateral pass that looked like they had Cam Coleman sort of dialed up to make something big happen. Gentry Williams goes out there, makes that play. There was another play, I believe, on that same drive that Williams made a really good play on. So certainly not perfect. I mean, you look at a couple of the interception chances that they had tonight, which is something they really haven't had going into this game. I know Peyton Bowen dropped one early. Kendall Daniels had a chance at another after Bowen got in a guy's face and made a really good play himself. But Kip Lewis talked about how he feels like those turnovers are going to come if they just keep pressing, keep working on it, and don't get too down about it, because that's really about the only thing that you can put as a negative mark against his defense, the fact that they have yet to create a turnover. But I think it also illustrates how good this defense is, that they can turn in a performance like this, a performance like we saw against Michigan, a performance like we saw against Temple and Illinois State, without forcing turnovers. I mean, it just shows the difference in this defense from, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, Brent Venables, where it was just hold on tight and you have to force multiple turnovers to even have a chance. That's not what this defense is.
Turnovers do not always equal victory, Alex Grinch. Take notes. No, it's a spot where you look at it, and Brent Venables talked about too. They're going to get some guys back over this bye week. He didn't say those names, but I think he was alluding to Giovanni Gibson on the offensive side of the ball and Eli Bowen on the defensive side of the ball, a guy that was obviously excellent for this defense a year ago. That's only going to help. You look at the fact that some of these penalties, I thought a lot of the penalties that Oklahoma's defense racked up today were the ones that Brent Venables talks about. Obviously, you don't want to have any, but like these were erring on the side of trying to make a play, being there. It wasn't like, hey, Oklahoma was so far behind, they were dragging guys down and just saying, we'll take the pass interference instead of the touchdown, stuff like that. And I feel like as it gets further and further into the year, it feels like they just keep mopping stuff up, and there's not really been any tackling issues. And you look at what a team with a great rushing attack like Auburn coming into today, their average down to distance on third down was 3rd and 11.5. If Oklahoma is holding the opponent to 3rd and 11.5, nobody's going to score 20 on this team. Like the way that this defense is played, as long as John Mateer doesn't have like a turnover deep in his own territory that has gifted free points, if you are playing that level of defense, if you're getting certainly like 9 sacks, stuff like that, but anything close to that, there are not many offenses that in the country that are going to be able to operate like that, Carson.
No, I agree. There are some really good teams still left on the schedule, some really good offenses. But we saw an offense with some really good playmakers today, and without OU getting a takeaway, only 17 points. They've still not allowed 20 points to an opponent this year. That's pretty remarkable, especially you look at even a true freshman, Bryce Underwood, someone with so much talent, already leading them over wins. They beat Nebraska, didn't they? They ended up winning that game?
Yes, they did.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, still they're a good team. That's a good team that they beat. Auburn, obviously, with Coleman, Singleton, Arnold, running game. They have some playmakers, and to hold them to 17 without a turnover is pretty remarkable. Who knows? I mean, there are different kind of weapons in this league. You look at Lenora Sellers. I know that team's struggling right now, but he's a dynamic playmaker. The receiver talent that Bama has. There are good playmakers, but OU through 4 games has shown the abilities to stop different styles of offense, which I think that bodes well from the different styles that Missouri let Ahmad Hardy, led Missouri offense. There's so many different looks that they'll see, but how they've looked through 4 games really sets them up well, I think.
Yeah, and like I said, only going to get better with Eli Bowen coming back into the fold. Right. That was the guy that was, questioned.
Yeah, he was their best cornerback and maybe their best defensive player at the end of last year.
Yeah, and that's a guy that it's not just that. I feel like Gentry Williams is still kind of knocking off some of the rust after missing a year. We saw a little bit of Kendall Dolby at Cheetah late. That's a guy that's still knocking off some rust. Jacoby Johnson's a guy that is still playing through. I think everyone can see the massive shoulder, not sling, but sleeve. I don't even know what to shoulder brace, I guess, that he's playing with. It feels like this bye week's coming at the right time for some of those guys to knock off some rust and take steps closer to being healthy. And that was good stuff in the first half. Then in the second half, R. Mason Thomas gets shot out of a cannon. Second play of offense for Auburn in the second half, R. Mason Thomas comes around the edge, and he talked to us after the game. He said that you could tell I was so desperate. I literally leaped to tackle.
Yeah, I mean, he was getting a piggyback ride from his buddy Jackson.
So he had that happening, and then obviously I think that OU fans saw this at times last year. The Tulane game, last possession of the game, when OU knew, hey, they just could unleash because the team was having to pass down the field. R. Mason Thomas, the closer, he popped up. This Auburn game a year ago, after the Kip 6, when they knew Auburn has to throw the football, R. Mason Thomas, the closer, pops up. The only time it really didn't happen was against Missouri. You think about the entire second half against Alabama, they had to drop back and pass. It was big time there. And who but R. Mason Thomas, the closer, not a strip sack, but the sack for a safety that essentially sealed the game, fourth down. For the alumni, that was big for the alumni to get that to a 7-point victory instead of a 5-point victory there as well. But I think you saw Ryan. This is a guy in R. Mason Thomas we saw a year ago that it felt like he played with a little bit of pressure till he got that first sack, and then it almost was an exhale, and that's the R. Mason that was there for the rest of the year. I do wonder how big of a performance this is going to be to get those 2 sacks late for him.
Yeah, it really looked like he'd been pressing to this point. I mean, you think about the targeting call last week, some of the other things that he'd been through, and not that he hadn't been effective, he had, but he just hadn't broken through and made that big-time play, and he does it on his second play right out of the gate tonight, and it just felt like maybe that's the pressure release valve that we can start seeing the R. Mason Thomas that we saw all of last year. Certainly he looked the part tonight, not only on those 2 sacks, but on a couple other really big-time plays for him. But those sacks, I mean, that last one, Auburn's tackle, I think Mason Murphy didn't have a chance there. Their running back just sort of looked like, not that he gave up, but there was no way he was going to stop R. Mason Thomas there. And just a big-time play for him. And he talked about that after the game, that was just sort of really juiced after watching the defense pile up the sacks in the first half and ready to get out there. And he certainly looked the part tonight.
Yeah, no, he definitely did. And I think PJ Adebawore talked to us earlier in the week and said he's going to play the same no matter what. I think he had a little extra juice missing the first 30 minutes of a football game. I'm going to come in and I'm going to be a force. Not that, to your point, Aber, not that he hadn't been a force, but statistically we hadn't seen the sacks. We hadn't seen the numbers that we saw last year. We saw them today, and we saw just how dominant he is. And, I mean, we're looking at really good defensive end play from Marvin Jones Jr., Taylor Wine. R. Mason Thomas really is that much of a difference maker. And then it seemed poetic that he got the safety to kind of seal the game there. Just a heck of an outing for him. Expect plenty more plays like that for SEC play.
Yeah, it was a phenomenal showing from the defense, and it gave the offense time to figure itself out as we flip this thing over to the other side of the ball. John Mateer in this offense, they came in. It was going to be a really, really tall test for them. We knew that Jake Michla, very, very tender. I think Brent Venables said they were dealing with some ankles after the game, the Oklahoma offensive line. Who he was talking about is Jake Michla, who had gotten rolled up on, Vechi Wiwu, who had gotten rolled up on. Both those injuries happened in the Temple game. Fasusi missed the Temple game. He gave it a go. Didn't start. He played 2 or 3 drives. I don't remember which one it was. But basically, you could tell he was much more limited than the guy that handled Michigan no problem. And I think that panned out in the running game, guys. I thought Auburn, credit to them defensively, they had scouted all of Ben Arbuckle's motions, all of the swing passes, screens, whatever you want to call it, the quick passes behind the line of scrimmage to get to the perimeter. I thought Auburn secondary, who has been a poor tackling secondary through 3 games, stepped up and played that really, really well early, which kind of nullified some of the manufactured running game. And it was about picking their spots here. You never really saw Jaron Canick get into a really consistent rhythm across the middle of the field. He had some big catches, absolutely, but it wasn't like hitting him over the head like Baylor did with Michael Trigg, stuff like that. But here's the important thing. For John Mateer, I think he was 8 of 16 in the first half, but he came out there, and in the second half, when Oklahoma needed him most, he finished the game 16 of 17, 11 straight completions, including the fact that Aber and Jackson Arnold had marched down the field on a 14-play, 75-yard drive, punched it in, goes up 17 to 16. It was the first time Oklahoma had trailed all year long. 6 plays later, John Mateer's in the end zone on the other end, and it felt like maybe not one play, but we've seen the scramble drill play that led to the Satania completion against Michigan. We saw the 51-yarder against Temple, which is, no, it's Temple, yeah, but that's going to look really great in a nice, clean highlight package reel. It felt like you can splice that drive together that was finished off. It was the 15 yards over the middle of the field to Canick, the 31-yarder on the sideline to Satania that they had to review it, but
that was just a beautiful pass.
Yeah.
I mean, the touch that he put on that pass was as good as we've seen him.
And he said after the game, too, he almost joked that, I didn't have that touch against Michigan, so I guess I can learn. This coaching staff feels very online at times and very isolated at times. But no, I mean everything you wanted from a tier there, and then one play later, 9 yards, boom, powers in the end zone.
Yeah, and I was glad for that because Mateer throwing for a touchdown and running for a touchdown to stretch his streak to 10 was one of my bold predictions going into this game. So we got that one there. Didn't quite get the 50-yarder out of Tate Sandell.
Close.
Needed one more yard.
It was close
on that, but just another. They didn't have to use John Mateer. Didn't have to run him 18 times in this one. I thought that was important, even though their running game needed a little bit of juice. He gave them what they needed without them having to get him banged up. But a fantastic game from Satania. And just not that OU shown a lot of depth with the receiver group, but I think you look at those top 4 guys, Satania, Burks, Canick, Lewis, and they just continue to be productive week after week.
Yeah, it was. I know it's kind of cliche to say killer instinct, but it was a lot of killer instinct in the second half, particularly that final drive from John Mateer, just starting it with that pass to Canick. As you just said, Aber, that beautiful throw to Satania obviously needed to be looked at, but that was just, the touch was perfect. And then finishing it off with the scamper, it was surgical. It was a surgical drive to get them the win. Obviously, defense had to answer, and as we know, they obviously did. They shut everything down from Auburn in that last drive. So just excellent performance, especially in the second half from Mateer. And even if the stat line isn't the sexiest, you look at 24 for 36 for 271 yards. 1 touchdown, that's a good stat line, but it's not just like, oh my gosh, that's video game numbers. But it's a respectable stat line, and when you take into consider the final drive that he commanded, that was a pretty vintage performance from John Mateer.
Well, and I think it can't be lost that a year ago, when Oklahoma was put into positions where they could try to stay in a game or go win a game, and really honestly, in this first 3 years of the Venables era, the times that they really grabbed the brass ring and went for it, the Texas game in 23, that was good. I thought BYU to close out the 23 season as well. With Jackson Arnold. Dylan Gabriel, the concussion was really, really gritty. But the story of the early Venables era had been that first year, how many one-possession games did they lose? How many, in 2023, you get the Ethan Downs interception in Lawrence that should have killed off the game, and you're punting 3 plays later because you can't punch it in. You get the turnover in Stillwater that you should have used that to roll forward and win that football game. Either one of those, you're in the Big 12 championship game. Didn't happen. How many times were they unable to live with success a year ago, albeit a ton of bad stuff all over the place, whether it be the offensive line, all that stuff. But this is an offense that is not perfect right now. That it's an offensive line that was banged up today, even though it had starters. And John Mateer just looked up and said, hey, whether it's Ben Arbuckle, whether it's John Mateer, whether it's the tandem of those guys, whether it's Jaron Kanik as a tight end, whether it's Satania now as a wide receiver, they have found ways, Aber, to go and win the damn football game. Whether it be the 16-play drive to knock out Michigan, this drive back here. We have not seen that consistently from Brent Venables and co. so far, and they've managed games perfectly so far.
Yeah, I think that's been a big key to this this early success that they've had. Just the confidence that just keeps building in the offense. And, it's not perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. But that's one of the things that Brent Venables said today, is that this illustrates that, you don't have to go out there and win the game yourself, pretty much. That you can lean on the rest of the team. And they did that on both sides. By the way, Ryan, going back to something you said earlier, the early PFF numbers are in, still filling some of those out, but Michael Fasusi played 9 plays.
There you go.
Tonight there. Logan Howland played the other 57 at left tackle. Derek Simmons graded out the best among the group, but I don't think any surprise that Isaiah Satania and Jaron Kanik, at least right now, are at the top of that list, with John Mateer not too far away from there. But I always shy away from the comparisons, especially when you're talking about a comparison to Baker Mayfield. But just the way that John Mateer carries himself on the field feels like that a little bit, and it sort of continues to build. Even after the game, John Mateer talked about being compared to Johnny Manziel a little bit.
With the money Mateer.
And said, yeah, maybe that's not a comparison that I want. But I'm sure he'd be open to the Baker Mayfield comparisons, because, again, he's got a long way to go to get there. But, so far the early returns are great on him.
They definitely are. And, I mean, you look at that twitchiness, that X factor, that all the cliches you can think of, he's exemplifying those. He is finally bringing back the swagger to this program that they kind of haven't had. I mean, Dylan Gabriel was good, 23. They had some good things, but it feels like this is a team that can win the close games, and that's massive, especially in a conference like this. You hear one-possession league from Brent Venables all the time, but there's some truth to that. It was a one-possession game tonight. Most games probably will be one-possession games, looking at all the SEC opponents from here on out being ranked. Some of them that we thought might underperform.
Well, except for South Carolina right now.
Oh, true. South Carolina is unranked.
But still,
right now. But I mean, that's
a
still
daunting schedule, especially when you think about what South Carolina did in here last year.
Yeah, and that's still a Lenora Sellers-led team. I mean, every team they play, aside from our friends at Kent State next week or 2 weeks from now, good football teams, they need to be able to win these close games, and Mateer just seems like he has his head on his shoulders, which is huge for that.
I just continue to be, when I say game management perfect, that doesn't mean every play is perfect, things like that. I think the only thing that you could step back and go, that moment at the start of the fourth quarter where Oklahoma had the ball, 4th down, in plus territory, deep into plus territory. They left the offense out there just to end the quarter. It was a 4th and 3. They opted to kick the field goal at that point. That might be the one where you look back and go, hey, especially if Chapman hadn't put this drive together, suddenly instead of going 16-10, you could have gone 20-10 if you could have punched that across, stuff like that, trust your defense, all that. But at the moment, I kind of was like, I probably would have gone for it, but I can understand Brent Venables sitting here going, the way that this defense is played, like I can understand a college football coach getting to that decision, being like, let's just keep field position, keep momentum, get points, things like that. But you look at it, they had timeouts to use if they needed them. They didn't really need them there on that last drive. They had given themselves plenty of time to go down. Brent Venables even said that in the postgame he had thought about in that moment, is this a spot where we maybe try to sit on the ball and don't score? And then he looked up and said, nope, 5 minutes left. We just punched in Johnny, is what he said there. So you're starting to see that they're able to make those things, which, again, hand up, I've been as critical as anyone about the game management over the last 3 years, and they've now had in 2 different games perfectly run 2-minute drills before halftime that ended in points. You have the way that the end of the Michigan game was managed. I thought the way the end of this game was managed was really, really good from the moment Auburn scored. It's all the makings of the stuff that you really, really want to see as far as steps forward for Brent Venables in a make or break year 4.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the progress that OU's defense has made over the Brent Venables era. You talk about the progress that the offense has made this year under Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer. But we're seeing the growth out of Brent Venables, the coach. And that game management element that you're talking about there, Ryan, and some of the other things. I think, honestly, just the way that he handled the transition to calling the defense and maybe giving up some power in some areas. Maybe not all of it was his choice with the Jim Nagy and things like that. But I said this before the season that I felt like what Brent Venables has done this year is be able to focus on his strengths and what makes Brent Venables as successful as he's been. One of them is calling the defense. And relating in when it comes to recruiting, especially, but also with his current roster, was able to hold on to that core of defensive players that is making it such a big impact out here so far this year. And and we're seeing growth in some areas where he really struggled, the game management, clock management, things like that. And those things are what shows up late in halves, early in halves. He talks about the middle 8. They've been really successful in that group, especially defensively. Probably would like more offense there. But we're seeing so much growth out of him as a head coach, and, sort of gotten away from talking about Brent Venables on the hot seat, as some other coaches have had the heat turned up on him, especially one up there in Stillwater. But also with the success that OU is having, where the trajectory of this season, not easy. There's still plenty of big-time tests to go, but the trajectory looks a whole lot different now than it did a month ago.
If we were given, like we do the September Heisman, if we were given if we stopped Coach of the Year voting in the SEC right now, it might just be Brent Venables. You were mentioning Aber as we were coming in here, Ross Dellinger, who does his rankings every week based off of resume and no prior, so it's a lot more volatile. But he has
I love the way that Ross does it.
Yes,
I voted in the AP poll for a long, long time, and I'm not going to say I'd approached it exactly like that, but tried to have that mindset coming into it. And anyway,
yeah, he's Oklahoma number 1.
Yeah.
Which, again, it doesn't mean Oklahoma's going to come out and be the number 1 team in the country come 1 p.m. on Sunday, but it's just one guy,
they should be in the top 10.
Yeah,
yes.
They're definitely going to be in the top 10, and there's nothing that's going to shake them out of the top 10 until they roll into the Cotton Bowl. This game, though, Isaiah Satania's big day, was not without some controversy, and it all was around Satania. Satania was in the middle of everything today. The first drive of the game, Isaiah Satania has a moment where, was it a bobbled catch that should have been incomplete? Was it a ball where he was ruled down, or was it a catch, completed pass, fumble, the ruling on the field, Auburn, fumble, pick it up, scoop and score, big rumble. Instead, they brought that bad boy back. I think in the end in that, they got the right call out of it. I just don't know if, with the video evidence that they had, if that was like a clear and obvious overturn of that. Isaiah Satania caught a touchdown pass today. It was a touchdown pass that the SEC has come out and said that the officials incorrectly applied the rule. This is after Auburn totally snapped too low on the punt. Oklahoma takes over at the +12. Heath Ozida gets a holding, so it's 1st and 10 from the 22. They run Torrey Blaylock up the middle. Then they go tempo, is what Ben Arbuckle claims. Tempo. Where Satania drifts all the way to the sideline. Auburn, Hugh Freeze is trying to point it out in time. He's trying to call a timeout real time. None of that pops off. The defense doesn't cover up Satania. The easiest 22-yard completion of his career for a touchdown. Everyone, top to bottom, said tempo, except for Deion Burks, who said my job on that play was to go out and trash talk the corner and engage everything going on there so that the corner did not make his way over to Satania. If it's just tempo, why does it matter, Deion, that the corner is engaged with you?
Well, also Bob Stoops gave him up on the radio broadcast.
Yeah, so that they had practiced that bad boy all week. The SEC came out and basically said, yep, we flubbed that one. But as I said in my story, which you can find on the website, littleseriousonside.com, after trips to Eugene and Lubbock in the early 2000s, I don't think Oklahoma fans are too worried about this one, and they probably are due some of that refereeing karma. Satania also had the play on the sideline on the key drive. rule to catch, all that stuff. It could have been a very different day for Isaiah Satania today, Carson.
Yeah, if the refs had the Auburn money line, it could have been a lot different. I'm joking, of course, but yeah,
I'm not.
I did not see on that touchdown from Satania. I didn't even see what happened because I was so zoomed in on, okay, it was a tackle, Mateer's getting ready to snap it again. I didn't see what was going on near the sideline. But as soon as he throws it, I'm like, where the hell is he throwing it to? And I just see Satania just streaking wide open. I'm like, oh, that's who he's throwing to. But interesting to now have seen the footage, like, it's creative. Maybe it's not legal, but it's very creative. I did get a pretty good angle of the drop, fumble, whatever you want to call it, on the first drive, though. And I was shocked they were able to overturn that call. It just looked like there was not a clear-cut angle, like, is this a catch, is this not a catch? Is his butt down? Is he still up? I was shocked that they overturned that, but obviously worked in OU's favor, and I really don't know what the right call would have been there. So I think the refs didn't necessarily get it wrong. It was so quick, and there wasn't just one clear-cut angle, so I was surprised that one got changed.
Yeah, I was a little surprised at that as well. I think that's probably the right call.
Probably,
but
yeah.
I'm not sure that we saw the evidence to do that. But Isaiah Satania, just a fantastic game from him. Really been building to this over the last couple weeks, but finished 9 catches, 127 yards, that touchdown, which was wild. I mean, the TV broadcast, because I went and watched it immediately afterwards to figure out, what the hell happened there. And the TV broadcast didn't even show Satania in the frame there. He was so close to the sidelines. But I asked Brent Venables about that play after the game, sort of where it came from, what the delicate balance there in walking the line of the rules. He didn't really give me an answer to either of those questions. Just said it was within the framework of the rules. Obviously, the SEC has come out and said, no, it wasn't. But the win still stands, and who knows what happens if that doesn't happen there. But certainly a big time play, and I think you're seeing some of the creative things that Ben Arbuckle brings to the offense. We've seen some creative things special teams wise that they're getting a little bit more comfortable taking some chances that maybe they haven't over the last couple of years.
You saw the Ben Arbuckle label is the pull cap formation, where it was a couple of plays they tried to run out with the unbalanced offensive line, things like that. So, yeah, like you said, clearly they have supreme confidence in this. And I kind of want to close here, boys. We took a step back, and this is not necessarily a Jim Nagy thing, because all these decisions with the wide receiver room happened before Jim Nagy really arrived, but were they going to basically play money ball with trying to keep Deion Burks and then bringing in a guy like Satania, bringing in a guy like Keontez Lewis, moving Jaron Kanik over to the tight end, bringing in Giovanni Gibson? But we've not got to see Giovanni Gibson yet. Imagine that's going to come for Kent State, as we mentioned earlier. Brent Venables kind of alluded to that, but he was a guy, Giovanni, that all throughout the spring we had heard consistently that dude is performing well, going to be a big piece of this offense. Satania finishes today with 127 yards and the touchdown. Keontez Lewis, only 2 catches for 29 yards, but he continues to be a third down machine for John Mateer. They've got great synergy there. Kanik, 4 for 62. I mean, you look at it, boys, and you got to give it up to Emmett Jones and Brent Venables. And this, again, was a pre-Jim Nagy thing. He had brought in Jermichael Carter. He was obviously hired in February. All the winter window stuff was done before that. But this has worked out really, really well. And now it feels like, Carson, if they could just get healthy on this offensive line, maybe they could get back to what we saw against Michigan, which was a really nice baseline to move that thing forward. And honestly, if the defense plays like this, they just got to be playing their best ball on the offensive line by like late October, it feels like, to balance the stuff out.
I think this team is some good run blocking away from taking it to the next level. I mean, that's the one point I'm like, okay, that is a weak point in this team. There are flaws at every position, but every team pretty much has flaws in every area. And the receivers have really impressed me, though, to your point. Satania, every game he's gotten a little bit better, especially offensively. Return game, he's looking crisp, no close calls lately. But 127 yards and a touchdown tonight, that's pretty incredible. Hope you had him on your college fantasy football teams. But he's looked really good. Keontez, just someone that's super reliable, and he has been for all 4 of the games so far. And I think adding a guy with size like Gibson who knows what he brings? Everything we heard during the spring is that he's a playmaker, he's a difference maker. That's going to be huge. Just shore up the offensive line. Obviously, it's been more consistent than what we saw at the beginning of last year, which is good. It means that they have plenty to grow on. And I mean, Bill Beatenbow, if there's someone that's going to make it better, it's probably him. So, I mean, you have to like where the offense is at just overall, especially having last year as kind of the comparison to. I mean, that helps. But overall, there's very little to complain about for OU fans.
Yeah, absolutely, and there's a lot to look forward to. You mentioned that offensive line. Derek Simmons was really good tonight, just looking at the early grades. You get Fasusi back. Presumably he will be in that starting lineup at some point. We saw how good he was against Michigan, and you can see the ability for a significant amount of growth. And if you can get it to where you can run the ball fairly consistently, then all of a sudden more things open up in the passing game for John Mateer, more things open up in the run game, with the quarterback run game and things like that. And this offense can really start to take off. They've been really good, been much better than they were a year ago, but you just see a lot of room for growth there in that offense, even with that improvement that we've seen and how much better they are than they were a year ago.
One of the things I put in my takeaways was an ugly win counts the same. And I think we've seen Oklahoma have a win against Michigan where I wouldn't even really classify that one as much as ugly as it was like there was a 10-minute period with the special teams miscues that Oklahoma could have separated. They didn't. They turned around. They put Michigan away. This thing was ugly today. And for Oklahoma to come out there and win ugly, something that Mateer had kind of said after the game, which I'm not sure the coach staff would have loved, is we had heard this a little bit this week, that there were moments where Oklahoma was having to do walkthroughs instead of actual practices with their first-team offensive line because of the tenderness on Mikla and Favechi and Michael Fasusi. And the fact that they came out here against a good Auburn defensive line, not a full week of work, really banged up. I think this is the worst we're going to see the offensive line the rest of the year, barring no other injury, stuff like that, just because they needed to get through today and get to the bye week, get to Kent State, and I think that was going to change things drastically. And they did. They got through that. Now, obviously, to get through October unscathed or to feel really good about that, they're going to need to support John Mateer in a different way. Certainly going up against that Texas defense here in a couple of weeks, things like that. But I'm really, really encouraged by what I've seen so far, and it's kind of where we started. And I think it's where we should probably end here. Through 4 weeks, it's 1/3 of the season, but Aber, you wrote the column, like we said, OklahomaSoonersOnSI.com. I don't think it's crazy for Oklahoma fans to start saying, should I familiarize myself with some of the playoff spots and things like that, and start to think a little bit about, hey, we said that this team has a wide range of, it could be really, really good, it could be really, really bad, and right now it's starting to look like things might be falling together between Ben Arbuckle, John Mateer, this offense, how good the defense has been, that maybe we start to look toward the upper end of what this season could be for Oklahoma football.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a team that, hasn't been to the playoff in quite a while, as involved as they were early in this thing. And certainly, it looks different now, and there's still a lot of season to go, but you can certainly see this team shaping up into one that can make a run, because with the schedule the way it is, yes, it's really difficult, but there's some winnable games out there. We mentioned South Carolina struggles. Arch Manning hasn't exactly looked like the world beater that some people thought he was before the season. Not that Texas still isn't really, really good, but also that's a game that is always sort of you never know what's going to happen there. And then that last 5 games still looks really tough. Ole Miss, Tennessee, Alabama, Missouri, LSU. But the way that the college football is now, really, if you can go 3-2 in that, you still have a chance to make the playoff. And could they get a home game here in the playoffs? What would that look like? Or go on the road to somebody that's really, really good. So it's something that, maybe don't shout it out so far, but you can at least start whispering, Sooners fans, that the playoffs are a possibility. even though they've looked sort of out of reach so far during the Brent Venables era. This season looks different.
I know that it's only 4 weeks into the season at this point, but this is such an interesting year for the SEC. I feel like Georgia and Alabama, are in Texas too at this point, are kind of expected to be the world beaters, just the best teams, superior talent, superior expectations. Don't get me wrong, I think all three of those teams are really solid, but I think there are about 10 other teams in this league that can compete with them on a given day. I think this conference realistically has a lot of teams that can compete for the playoff, and I think every team left on the schedule for OU can compete for a playoff spot. So this league, I mean, there's not an easy game besides Kent State, like I said a minute ago. So there's a lot that still needs to be seen. We need to see the offensive line get a little bit better. I want to see what it looks like when they get Bowen back, Gibson back. But you have to be encouraged. Again, last year was last year, 6 and 7. Like, it's easy to remember and be like, oh, this is better than that. Like, it's a good thing. But no, this team can legitimately compete for titles, just with how they've looked both sides of the ball. Have to get through a lot, but definitely there is a high ceiling for this team. I think higher than a lot of people would have guessed.
In a year where college football seems as wide open as it's been in a long time, a good defensive line, a great defensive line, an elite defensive line, that travels all over the country. We saw it travel to Philadelphia to smother Temple. It has showed up a couple of times here in Norman against Michigan and Auburn. And that's a really, really exciting start for this Oklahoma team that's now 4-0, 1-0 in SEC play. OklahomaSooners.com is the website. Aber's big column about the defense. I wrote about John Mateer, his close to the game, as well as the Isaiah Satania play that the SEC has now come and said, whoops, all that stuff. Carson's writing about R. Mason Thomas tomorrow morning. All day Sunday, OklahomaSooners.com, a story pretty much every 2 hours, recapping some angle from this big victory here in Norman is the place to be. And it's the place to be all throughout the bye week. As far as the podcast goes, next Wednesday is the next time we'll talk to you then. Don't yet know what the media schedule is, usually much lighter for the bye week. As soon as we know, we'll let you know. Easy to follow up with all of that stuff. And we will begin the countdown clock to Oklahoma and Texas with a small stop in with Kent State between there and that trip down to the Cotton Bowl. But that'll do it for us this evening. Big shout out to our good man Carson Field. Be sure you hit up John's YouTube page, John Hoover Media, to watch all of his highlights from this contest. Big thank you to Ryan Aber. Good to have you next to me in the box today.
Absolutely.
It's been a lot of fun. Like we said, OklahomaSooners.com. We'll link up with Hoove on Wednesday. Plenty to come from this big win over Auburn. But that'll do it here on the Postgame Pod 24-17. The Sooners are unbeaten. They're rolling on. And we'll talk to you guys here on Wednesday. See ya.